I'm remaining here to introduce our speaker for today, and it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague Sheila Smith and to welcome her back to our club. Sheila has served as Executive Director of Minnesota Citizens for the Arts since 1996. She was a leader in the 2008 Legacy Amendment campaign to pass the state constitutional amendment that created 25 years of dedicated funding for the arts and environment. Sheila has received national recognition from Americans for the Arts as a person who has dramatically affected the political landscape through arts advocacy efforts at the state level. As Adjunct Professor for the University of Minnesota, Sheila teaches and lectures nationally about the arts, grassroots advocacy, and other issues. For the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, she is part of the Public Policy Cabinet and a member of the Executive Committee. Today, Sheila is going to tell us about Creative Minnesota, the most comprehensive report ever done of the impact of the nonprofit creative sector in our state. This report fills gaps in previously available information about Minnesota's cultural field and improves our understanding of the field's importance to our quality of life and economy. The Creative Minnesota report also launches a new long-term endeavor to collect and report data on our state's creative sector every 2 years for analysis, education, and advocacy. Creative Minnesota, which is chaired by Sheila, is a collaborative project of the Minnesota Citizens for the Arts, the McKnight Foundation, the Minnesota State Arts Board, Target, the Bush Foundation, Mardag Foundation, and Jerome Foundation, and others. So please join me in welcoming Sheila Smith.
Well, she was looking for places to go in France. I got married in France at Monet's Gardens in Giverny on that Japanese bridge that you see in all the paintings. So I got lots of recommendations for you. So, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of your meeting today and talk a little bit about this new research about Minnesota's nonprofit arts and culture sector. I've been gathering with the folks from all of the major art supporting foundations in Minnesota for a while, looking to see if we could come up with a project together. And we realized very quickly that there was a real void in available information about the nonprofit arts and culture sector in Minnesota. If you look at any industry from dentistry to construction, you will know from somebody how many construction firms are there and what's the economic impact of construction in the state. And we just didn't know that for the nonprofit arts and culture sector. So we thought we'd get our act together and do something about it. And this research is the result. As Andrea said, this is the list of foundations and organizations that were part of putting this work together. And I'm excited to say that this morning the group met again and we've decided to do another report in 2 years on the economic lives of individual artists in the state and their economic contributions to the economy. So 2 years from now, maybe I get to come back and tell you about that. As we said, it's about filling the void to have information for education and also policymaking and education and advocacy at the Capitol, et cetera. And the good news is that this report that I'm going to talk about today and 11 regional reports covering the entire state are all available for free at a website, creativemn.org. So if you like what you hear today, there's tons more. This is just the highlights. We're gonna be like a skipping stone over a giant ocean of data. So this particular report is just about nonprofit arts and culture organizations and the spending of their audiences. It's not about individual artists. It's not about the for-profit arts. So the requirement was that the organization had to be a 501c3. This universe of organizations is about 1,269 organizations in the state, and by far the largest percentage of organizations is arts organizations of some kind. And within the arts organizations, by far the most numerous are performing arts organizations, such as theaters and choirs, that kind of thing. And you can see that by far the most numerous kind of organizations are very, very small, with an annual budget of $100,000 or less, sometimes completely volunteer run, but they're a huge part of the community. And what I like about that pyramid there is that I consider the very small organizations sort of the R&D sector of the nonprofit arts and culture. It's people banding together and coming up with new small nonprofits, trying out new models. And every organization that's larger, including the ones that are over $10 million a year, they all started out down there as tiny little all-volunteer efforts. So I think it's great that we have a lot of yeasty foment down there at the bottom for the future. Like I said, by far the most common type of organization is the performing arts and the arts of various kinds. And then the second largest type of organization included in the study are history organizations. You may not know that every single county in Minnesota has a historical society, so you have 87 right there. And then there's various historical societies about specific people or other areas like the Hennepin County, not the Hennepin, there's a Minneapolis Historical Society, et cetera. So, and then the third largest group is media and communications. Those are public broadcasters, radio and television. We didn't get them all into the study, but some did participate. The last time that we looked at the nonprofit arts and culture sector in Minnesota was in 2006. That study was called The Arts, a Driving Force in Minnesota's Economy. And we found then $835 million in economic impact. So now we can say we found $1.2 billion in economic impact in Minnesota. That's a huge jump in those years. And you can see that just over half of the amount is the direct expenditures by the organizations, and the other half is the direct expenditures of the audiences. So we're taking care of both of those pieces. And this number is amazing. If you look at our surrounding states, we have double the size of the arts economy of Wisconsin. Even though Wisconsin has slightly more people living in Wisconsin than we have people living in Minnesota, double the arts economy. This is 10.5 times the arts economy of Kansas. This is 12.5 times the arts economy of South Dakota. We are the bright, shining light of the prairie where the arts are concerned. No other state comes even close to the depth and impact of the nonprofit arts and culture in their state. We have something really magical going on here, and it's having a huge impact on our economy. So let's look at the different ways that this sector is affecting the economy. So here's just a visualization of the growth since 2006, which reminds me, two things happened between 2006 and now. One was the Great Recession. And nationally, the budgets of nonprofit arts and organizations dropped substantially, both because fewer people were attending nonprofit arts and culture events, and also because contributions went down as people's budgets got squeezed during the recession. That is recovering nationally. But in Minnesota, we went up. And why did we go up? Part of it is the contribution of the state through the Legacy Amendment, which passed in 2008, right in the middle of this period. So the state's investment in the nonprofit arts and culture increased, though, about $50 million total. So, but we have an increase annually of $360 million. So it shows how effective it has been to increase the investments in the arts. This $1.2 billion in economic impact supports over 33,000 jobs in Minnesota. You may not know folks that work at nonprofit arts or culture organizations, but they're... Here's one right there. I'm another. But they are all sorts of jobs like costume designers, professional musicians, artistic directors, stagehands, administrative assistants, dancers, and event coordinators. But it also includes those jobs that are supported by the economic activity of the nonprofit arts organizations. For example, there are printers in Minnesota whose principal business is to print the programs for all the big theaters downtown. And so many of their staff are supported principally by the economic activity of the nonprofit using their donations to pay for the program printing, for example. So we can also include truck drivers, printers, and caterers, of course, and lots of other things. This 33,000 full-time jobs provides over $827 million in resident household income supporting families in Minnesota. So what's that? That's the salaries and wages and income Minnesotans used to pay for food, mortgages, and other living expenses right here in the state. So you don't have to move to New York to make your living in the arts. We have a very robust arts employment economy here. And I tell you, not a day passes where somebody doesn't say to me, I moved to Minnesota because of your reputation for a great creative sector, because I wanted to work someplace where people value the arts. And of course, in Minnesota, we passed the Legacy Amendment, which created 4 funds for land, water, parks and arts, parks and trails, and arts and history. So the people of Minnesota spoke in 2008 by 56% approving the Legacy Amendment to create some dedicated funding for these things. And I think it's important that in Minnesota, we're the only place in the whole country where the people voted to increase their taxes, however, very slightly, 0.3% is a tiny, tiny bit, to make more investments in these areas. So, what does that mean? Well, right now, for every dollar of state investment, nonprofit arts and culture organizations are supported by over $5 in revenue from other sources. And so, of course, that makes the state investment a great investment with a match of 5-to-1. But if you look at the orange circle there, the orange circle is income from donations from individuals and businesses and foundations. So $2 out of every 6 is coming from the public and donations. And that's always important to point out, because when the Legacy Amendment passed, people said, oh, we don't have to contribute to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations anymore because the Legacy Amendment's going to take care of it. Well, actually, that's not true. The Legacy grants make it possible for nonprofit arts and culture organizations to have more access programs for people who may not have otherwise attended. But it takes $2 out of every 6 in contributions to provide access to the public to all these artistic opportunities. And I think that's important to point out. So we are up to 19 million annual attendees at nonprofit arts and culture events annually. This is a huge jump of 4.5 million additional attendees since 2006. And what's interesting about this, the population of Minnesota right now, I think, is something like 5.2 million. So on average, there's about every single human being in Minnesota is getting 4 experiences from nonprofit arts and culture organizations, whether they're ticket buyers or visitors to museums or you name it. So that's a lot of interaction between the public and these organizations. Here's something we've never been able to count before. How many students are served by the nonprofit arts and culture organizations? And we counted 2.6 million. This number is also interesting because there's only 900,000 K-12 kids in Minnesota. So on average, every kid is getting 3 experiences in the nonprofit arts and culture annually. In addition to those individual visits, we've counted almost 25,000 student group visits. If you go to any of those major institutions downtown, you will see a line of school buses in front of them every day during the school day as kids come down from Bemidji by bus to get their first experience with the world's greatest art at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, or to see a theater production for the first time in their lives at the Guthrie Theater. And in addition to the student group visits, we had over 766,000 classes, workshops, and readings, which is important to know because this is educational opportunities experienced by the rest of the public, anybody who's over the age 18, which means that these organizations are really important to lifelong learning. It's often said that nonprofit arts and culture organizations only serve the wealthy, and this is a myth buster, in that we find that 43% of attendees have annual household incomes of under $60,000 a year. So the nonprofit organizations are not just serving rich people, they're serving the whole spectrum of society. Attendee spending is something that's valuable to know if you are in the economic development business, because we find that the attendee spending averages just over like $20.50 per person. In the metro area, actually statewide, 16% of the state's audience is non-local. That is, 16% of the audience is coming from outside of the area to spend money somewhere they don't live at $20.50 per person. So that's great. You want to attract as many people as possible from outside the area to spend money where you are. And non-local attendees spend 80% more than local attendees. So yet again, another reason for local Chamber of Commerce and tourism CVBs to think about how can we promote local arts attractions to people outside of the region so they could come here and spend their money instead of somewhere else. Shifting gears just a little bit, we find over 42,000 individual artists live in Minnesota, and this is according to the most recent census. And no look at the nonprofit arts and culture would be complete if we weren't looking at employment of artists. So we find that Minnesota surpasses the US level of artists in the workforce. If 1 is the average on a national level of how many artists are employed in the economy, we're at 1.5%. And that big, tall item right there in the middle, we found that Minnesota has 5 times the national average in employment in publishing. nonprofit publishers. So these are people who work at Milkweed Editions, Coffee House Press, Grey Wolf Press, the Minnesota Historical Society Press, Borealis Books, Loon Feather Press, and many, many more. If you go online and just Google Minnesota publishers, it's pages and pages and pages of presses, which is really interesting considering we just had 30,000 people in Minneapolis visiting the Artists and Writers Conference, that there was some coverage in the news. The reason they came here is because of this density of writers and publishers. All right, shifting gears again, we're going to go statewide and take a quick look at all the different 11 arts regions in the state. The study found a robust arts economy in every corner of the state. This map shows you the number of arts and culture organizations we found in every corner. Just a few quick highlights for you. The Arrowhead, which is 3 on the map, has the second largest arts economy in the state behind only the 7-county metro area. Southeast Minnesota has the largest increase in arts jobs and audience members since the Legacy Amendment passed. And down in Southwest Minnesota, we found the highest percentage of audience members who are non-local because there's a lot of people coming from Iowa and South Dakota to go to arts events in that region. So here we are in the 7-county metro area. 645 of the organizations in the study came from the metro area. So that's about half of the whole pool of organizations. And it makes sense, of course, that the highest density of arts organizations would also be in the center of the state. We're fortunate in that our major metropolitan area is actually physically center in the state. I run a nonprofit that is statewide, and nobody wants to meet anywhere else. They want to meet here because it's in the middle, so that's handy. This is 217 more organizations than we found in 2006, so that's a really impressive growth in numbers. Most of those organizations were the smaller ones, but you can see that performing arts is, again, the most common kind of organization. Just in this region alone, the 7-county metro area, 16 million attendees out of the 19 million attendees total. So again, the bulk of the audiences are here also. This is an increase of 4 million attendees since 2006. Adding up to $1 billion in economic impact for just the 7-county metro area. So 5/6 of the economic impact from the nonprofit arts and culture sector is right here in the 7-county metro area. Also in this region, 30,000 jobs supported. Remember, we had 33,000 jobs statewide. 30,000 of them are right here in the core 7-county metro area. This is an increase of nearly 11,000 from 2006. And here your audience spending per person is higher than the rest of the state. So that's good news too. So if you are going to an event, what are you spending your money on? So imagine you are a young person with kids and you want to go see something at the Guthrie. First you have to hire a babysitter. You get in your car. On the way to the Guthrie, you probably have to buy gas. So we're going to add that to your total. You get near the Guthrie and you find some nice restaurant and you and your friends have dinner out, maybe a little wine. And then after dinner, you go to the show. During intermission of the show, you love the show so much, you buy a souvenir in the shop, and maybe you get another glass of wine. After the show, you and your friends say, hey, let's go out and to the local watering hole and talk about the plot. That was really cool. So you go out and you have a little more alcohol, then somebody else drives you home after you've been drinking so much. But think about this person. They have had an economic interaction with the city every step of the way since they left their house. Whereas the person who stayed home and watched The Voice all night has had zero economic interaction with town. So you really want people to get up and out of, our enemy is the Barco Lounger. You want them up and out of the Barco Lounger and out and about. And the arts do that very, very well. So we have reached the end of the road. As I said, this report and all the 11 regional reports are available online at creativemn.org if you want more information. There is a lot of it. These, again, are our sponsoring partners who we always want to call attention to because this work would not have been possible without their participation. And now I can entertain questions if you have any. Yes?
So out of all those arts organizations, I know there's a bunch of new ones since you last did it, but how stable are those organizations? Do they come and go a lot?
They do come and go a lot. It's sort of like new restaurants. Somebody has an idea, they get it going, and then maybe it doesn't work. But then, of the 10 that start out, maybe 5 years later, a few of them are still alive and growing. So like I said, it's sort of the R&D sector as people try new combinations, new forms of art, or just a new theater company in a small town that never had one before. They give it a try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So there's a lot of churn down there. Yes?
Do the cities' art fairs, such as Edina has their art fair, or the Uptown Art Fair, does that contribute towards this?
If an art fair is organized as a 501c3, then they would have been in this research. If it's a for-profit art fair, it would not have been included. Yes?
Can you give some examples of the ones that would be for-profit organizations in this area?
Well, I'm pretty sure the Uptown Art Fair is a for-profit where simultaneously Powderhorn Park has their own art fair, which is a kind of counter fair. That one's a nonprofit.
No, but anyway, the other big, like, is the MIA, is that nonprofit?
All the major institutions are nonprofits. Minneapolis Institute of Arts, Ordway, Guthrie, St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, Minnesota Orchestra, Walker Arts Center, all those big ones. Chanhassen is a for-profit.
There are very few in the state. Very few for-profit arts organizations in Minnesota. It's very rare.
That's right. Yes?
Not a question so much as a little bit of history. I've lived in Bloomington since 1971. There was an old art center that I think was made of cardboard walls. It was pretty ramshackle.
It was junky,
It
yeah.
was torn down, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anyway, my daughter had some experience in there with kids' theater. And I belonged to Bloomington City Orchestra, and she belonged to Angelica Cantanti, so I've been active in the arts organization. But what I want to say is that, I don't know what year this was, but I know that we're still meeting in the old city hall. Susan Anderson was a real pushy type person.
Oh, yeah, I know
Which
her.
was a good thing, because the Schneiders, as a lot of you know, Deb and Ann Schneider, took, I think, a photography class from her, or something like that. And they were willing to donate $1 million for a new art center.
Wow.
So that's why we've got the city hall and the art thing. It's an all-purpose building. We've got the jail. And the city offices. But thanks to people like that, we, and this arts organization in Bloomington is just terrific.
Yeah, it's spectacular. I think it's a great model for other cities too. There are other cities that have city-owned arts facilities like Red Wing and the TV Sheldon and Worthington and Memorial Hall, but I think yours is the most beautiful and the most sophisticated of all of them. Yeah.
Just two questions. You said the 42,000, I think, was the stat for a number of artists. So that's people that only declare artists as their trade or as their work, right?
Is their occupation in the census,
So that's it. Okay, but then the other question was, so that nice piece you had the pie chart there of actually spending money on a night out, say, for example. Do you have any idea how that might compare, as we're putting up the Viking Stadium in the middle of downtown, how that might compare to a sporting event? Just out of curiosity, because we do, as a society, pretty readily support often, structures such as that. And we actually had a great presentation recently from someone, but I'd be curious to hear. I would think arts would actually produce more.
Well, on the principle that it's important to get people out of their house, I would think it would be similar. But the basic difference is that the Vikings are a for-profit entity and their earnings go back to private individuals, where all of these nonprofit activities are community organizations where any profit goes back to the organization to help serve more people. So the fundamental purpose of it is completely different. I have looked at, however, total attendance at all of the major sports events compared to our total attendance, and the nonprofit arts and culture attendance figures dwarf the for-profit attendance by many multiples, and I can't remember the exact figure, so I don't want to say it out loud, but in terms of number of people served, because there are so many organizations and there's stuff going on all day, every day, in every corner of the state with nonprofit arts and culture organizations, from classes to workshops to performances to gallery showings to whatever, there's a ton of activities and events happening. Whereas at the major sports facilities, you can only basically have 1 or 2 sports events a day. So just the sheer number of activities and opportunities is much larger amongst nonprofits.
John? You had a slide up there that indicated that money is still being raised by individuals and through ticket sales mostly. What is your organization, other than these slides, doing to help that fundraising?
Minnesota Citizens for the Arts is a 501c4 political action organization, and our principal purpose is to lobby the legislature and Congress on behalf of the nonprofit arts, and then to create research that supports the advocacy with many, many, many partners. We don't work on the philanthropic corner of it. That's more the purview of the foundations in Minnesota, such as McKnight, Jerome, et cetera.
Would you be able to speak to what Minnesota does to provide arts and cultural opportunities to, let's say, the less advantaged?
Sure. The Legacy Amendment, when it passed, has very specific language about what the dollars can be spent on. It's actually a very brief sentence that the legacy dollars must be spent on art, arts access, arts education, and the preservation of our history and cultural heritage. And so the legislature, when they're appropriating dollars from the Legacy Amendment, stick to those very short phrases. And as a result, the State Arts Board and Regional Arts Councils, which are the state's distribution system for the nonprofit arts in Minnesota, most of the dollars are going to access programs. That is, programs that help folks who wouldn't ordinarily have access to arts and history opportunities gain access. And the many, many different kinds of folks that might have a hard time, whether it's because of geography or because of their income or whatever status, it helps make the link between the activities of the nonprofit and their ability to take classes and see the greatest art in the world at Minneapolis Institute of Arts, which is free every day, or whatever access program is being run by the various organizations.